You know, from the early days of God's dealing with his people, even way back when God told Abraham he would make him into a nation, the reason that God was going to do that was not necessarily just to bless Israel, was to bless all the other nations through Israel. And this is a way that we bless other people, that God blesses other people through us when we do things like the shoe boxes and things like that. And that's no joke what that video said. If this is kind of new to you, these shoe boxes for I don't know how many years have affected people's lives all over the world. Man, you can go on to Samaritan's Purse website, SamaritansPurse.com and or .org, I don't remember, but you can see video after video of the life-changing impact that these crazy shoe boxes have had on millions of children around the world. Many of those children are grown up now, and they're working back with the Operation Shoebox, Operation Christmas Child thing. So it's just absolutely amazing. And one of the things, if you watch some of these videos, or like we're going to be showing over the next couple of weeks, is it kind of makes you realize how much we take for granted, how much that we really take for granted. In fact, it reminds me of an inscription I saw on a headstone a few years ago that simply said, "Forgive me for the days that I wasn't grateful." Forgive me for the days that I wasn't grateful. You'll notice that person is still alive, evidently. But it's so important to this person that everybody sees that when they walk by, and that's what he wants on his headstone. I think it would be a good thing for all of us, maybe not to put on a headstone, but to have sort of imprinted in our heart, Lord, forgive me for the days when I wasn't grateful. I think one of the things that we think about when we talk about ingratitude is we don't usually consider it to be something that really requires forgiveness. Complaining and whining usually doesn't feel like a sin. We may know it's a sin, but it's not something we feel like that we need to be concerned about repenting for. But the New Testament repeatedly calls us to be a people who are thankful, a people who are grateful. And so in these weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, we want to spend a couple of weeks looking at this because it's so important to God. And I think also because it will help us to get through these difficult times that we've been going through. So today I want to talk about how we need to have a grateful heart. We need to have a grateful heart. And so 1 Thessalonians says that we need to give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will. This isn't just some optional helpful suggestion. This isn't some, point to have a happier life. No, this is a command. This is what God wants from us, to give thanks. In fact, we're going to look at a passage today from the book of Numbers that shows us just how serious God is about this. But before we look at that, I want us to remember what the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Philippi, one of the greatest verses in Philippians 2:14. Do everything without complaining. Do everything without complaining. Maybe your version of that might say grumbling. But the word translated complaining or grumbling, there's a kind of important word because it communicates to us that grumbling and complaining isn't like just what you say, but it's kind of your attitude and sort of even the tone of that we use. And so this Greek word for grumbling or complaining is this word gongusmos. Gongusmos. It's a great word. We get our word gong from it. And it's just this great word that kind of means almost like how it sounds. And so when we talk about complaining, we talk about whining and ingratitude, it's not what we say only, but it's how we say it. It's how we say it. It's the tone that we use. And this is right. Like you can say something and have it mean totally different than what it says because of your tone, right? Like husbands, wives, this, right? So it's all about the tone. And so talking about this word gongusmos, we're talking about this negative attitude, this critical spirit, a whiny tone that never seems to find the good or the positive or the blessings in life. And so in the fourth book of the Bible, in the Old Testament, the book of Numbers, we're going to be looking at that, Numbers chapter 11. And in this episode, the Israelites, they've been rescued from slavery in the land of Egypt. They're headed, they're on their way to the promised land, to Canaan, to the land flowing with milk and honey, this amazing place that God had been promising would be theirs, and they're headed there, they're on their way. But if you know the story, you'll remember that they wandered around in the wilderness as they were going there for 40 years. You say, well, why? Why were they wandering around in the desert for 40 years? It's because of this gangusmos. It's because of this attitude. This ungrateful, complaining, whining, seeing the negative, not having faith, not able to be positive and seeing God's blessing. And it comes up time and time again in the story of the Israelites. In the story of God's people wandering in the wilderness, they're constantly complaining and whining and not being grateful. And so in Numbers chapter 11, around verse 4, it talks about how the rabble with them began to crave other food. The rabble around them began to crave other food. The Message version translates it, the riffraff among the people had a craving. I like that one better. The riffraff among the people had a craving. Because if you think about it, most of our complaining, most of our whining come from cravings that aren't met. Like if you really think about it. A lot of the time, like we're not whining about things that are necessities, things that we need, but it's things that we want. And we're complaining and whining when we get a craving. I don't know if you're aware of this or not. Like this is the truth. There have been intense studies done on this that one of the most, if not the most addictive substances on the face of the earth. You know what it is? Sugar, right? Like we know that. And sugar is in everything, right? But you know if you have ever tried to cut sugar entirely out of your life, you know, man, that is hard to do. Like that makes you angry and cranky and like you get headaches, and it's really hard to do because we crave it. We crave it. It's not something that we can't live without, but we think to ourselves, you know, if a craving is met, then we wouldn't be complaining. Well, at least that's what we tell ourselves, that our whining is from true hunger and not just a craving. So it says they had a craving, and soon the people of Israel were whining. So back to that passage in the Message paraphrase, it says that the riffraff among the people had a craving, and soon they had the people of Israel whining. Why can't we have meat? We ate fish in Egypt, and we got it for free, to say nothing of the cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlic, but nothing tastes good out here. All we get is manna, manna, manna. Like all we get is manna, manna, manna. All right, but you know, like I said, to get the real gangusmos out of this, we have to say it with the right tone, right? So I want us to do this together, so we can hear how pathetic it sounds. And so in your most whiny gangusmos voice, we're going to say all we get is manna, manna, manna. Okay? So I want you to your whiniest voice. All right? 1, 2, 3. All we get. Hey, so congratulations, you are much whinier than the first group. Like you won that contest. That's awesome. But it's just this whiny tone. Parents, you know the whiny tone. Wives, you know the whiny tone. So it's just this whiny tone, and it's not that they were going to challenge God with this struggle or what they were dealing with, or God were really having a hard time here. No, they were just whining about sort of inconsequential things. And so one of the things I want us to understand from this is that complaining is communicable. Complaining is communicable. It's a virus. It's an infection that can spread from one person and infect an entire community, just like anger that we talked about last week. At the beginning of the passage, it says the riffraff or the rabble. So it was evidently just a select few that started this. It wasn't all of them. It was just a few of them. There weren't very many, but there were enough. And when they began to complain, and pretty soon all the people were complaining, and that's the way complaining and whining and bad attitudes work. It just, like one family member over Thanksgiving, right? Or 2 employees with a bad attitude at work, and pretty soon everybody's complaining, or it's just a couple of neighbors. Or to be quite honest with you, maybe it's just a few church members complaining. This group in Israel that was wandering through the desert, this was a religious community. And I don't know why it is, but whether it's a church or whatever it might be, religious communities are fertile soil for complaining to occur. But it just takes a few people. It's an infection that spreads. And that's what happens to the people of Israel. There's a group of people, they become more and more negativier and more grumblier, and pretty soon it just infects the whole thing. But here's the thing. You know as well as I do that the opposite is true as well. Thanksgiving, gratitude can be communicable as well. It can be just as contagious. Now, this isn't the first time that the people had complained about the food. So this goes all the way back to the book of Exodus, and there's an example of this in Exodus chapter 16. You know, so in a sense, the people of God, the Israelites, they just barely had left the driveway. I mean, they left Egypt. God held up the Red Sea for them, and they walked right through it. They get on the other side of the Red Sea. They're headed for the Promised Land, and like no sooner than they leave, they're like kids in the backseat complaining. Like, are we there yet? I'm bored. Like parents want to make you hammer your kids whenever you hear that, right? I'm bored, and already they're doing this, and and they were complaining about the food as well, right? Exodus 16:3, like listen to this. It says, in the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. It infected the entire group at this point. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. If we had just died in Egypt, it would have been better than this, because at least there we sat around pots of meat and we ate all the foods we wanted. And you brought us out into this desert, and the whole bunch of us were going to starve to death. It would have been a lot better in Egypt. And you hear what's happening. They're not remembering correctly. They're revising history. They act like they had it so good in Egypt. Yeah, that's what we did. We just sat around and we ate meat all day long, just pots of meat. It was just this one big fondue party, and we were like at the hibachi table at the Japanese steakhouse, and it was just food everywhere. It was just awesome. Well, the problem with that was that they were forgetting a couple things. Like they're forgetting that, well, they were slaves in Egypt. Oh, yeah, that whole slavery thing. And like they don't mention that. They don't mention, pounding out bricks in the hot sun. That doesn't come up. And so here's an important aspect of complaining, and that it always creates more complaints. Complaining always multiplies into more complaints. The more we complain, the more we find to complain about. There have been study after studies about this, but I think that we could agree that is the case in our experience. And so despite of all the complaining, God is gracious. God does not give us what we deserve most of the time, but he's a patient Father. And so he provides the food that the people complain about, right? Provides them this, what is it called? It's okay, all right, there you go. So another way, I love this. So manna, people have tried to figure out, what is it or whatever. And I love this because manna simply defined, the word simply defined as, what is it? Or better yet, whatever it is. Like, haven't we all sat down at meals before? Maybe you were visiting somebody's house and they put something down and you're like, what is it? Like, whatever it is. I don't know, some kind of vegetables or some sort of meat products. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is. And so they have this food. It reminds me of that great, I love this great commercial from the 70s. Do you remember this guy right here? Like, who is this guy? That's Mikey, right? We know Mikey. So the two older kids are sitting down at the table. They've got this new thing in front of them. And one of the kids says, like, what is this stuff? I don't know. Some stuff supposed to be good for you. I don't know what it is. Well, did you try it? I'm not going to try it. You try it. I'm not going to try it. You try it, right? Then brainstorm, hey, let's get Mikey to try it. Yeah, Mikey will eat anything. And so Mikey eats this, whatever it is, and he likes it. He likes it, right? And he's grateful for this, whatever it is, stuff that's supposed to be good for you. Right? Do you remember, people? Yeah. And so I understand that, whenever you look at something and your question is, what is it? That's usually not reflective of fine dining. Like, I get that, okay? But still, we should be grateful because it's food. It's food. And so God has provided food for them to eat. And no matter no matter what they'd rather have, they can't complain about it because God has given it to them, and it's just a height of unthankfulness. But we've all been there. We've all been there right along with the Israelites, complaining about some food that's been given to us, which ultimately comes from God, right? All things come from him. But they wanted meat, but they were still getting, what is it? Manna, manna, manna. Well, eventually God had enough of this complaining. I don't know why, but this is probably one of my more favorite parts of the story as a father who had young kids. And maybe some of you can agree with this, but in Numbers chapter 11, verse 18, God's like, okay, tell the people this. I want you to consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed. If only you had meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. Right? You will eat it, not just for 1 day, or for 2 days, or for 5 days, or 10 days, or 20 days, but for a whole month. Like you're going to eat it till it's coming out of your nostrils, and you cannot stand it, right? You want meat? I'll give you meat. You want to cry? I'll give you some to cry about. I mean, he just sounds like such a dad, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever tried. I mean, that sounds wonderful to me on first blush, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever tried something like the Atkins diet, this protein diet where you don't have any carbs at all, and you think it's great initially because you can have like beef jerky and eggs and cheese and meat and beef jerky and cheese and eggs and it's great for a while, but then you're just like I'd kill somebody for a piece of bread. Like one potato, I would take somebody out, right? I mean, there's enough after a while, but God's like, hey, if this is what you want, I'm gonna give you what you want. Now understand that God was not interested in helping them lose weight. God wanted to help them lose an attitude. He wanted to help them lose the attitude of ingratitude. And so he's going to teach his people a really, really valuable, important lesson that hopefully we can learn as well. That when it comes to being grateful and content, when it comes to being thankful people, we have to recognize that everything comes to us from God. But here's the problem. Complaining always lacks perspective. It always lacks perspective. We forget things that we think that we know or thought that we knew, because what happens is that we just forget about perspective. And when we get in the midst of negative attitudes and complaining, whining spirits, we just lose focus. Instead of focusing on and being reminded of God's goodness and the grace of God in our lives and all the things that he blesses us with and all the food that we do have that keeps us alive, even though we may not know what it is, we lose perspective. We lose perspective. I was at a movie theater a few years ago. Movie theaters, places, lots of seats. Used to go there, and they would put this big video up on the screen. So I was in a movie theater a few years ago, and I was standing in line. I was in Lansing at the theater. I was about 3 or 4 people back, and I may have shared this with you. I don't know, but it was a very busy day there at the theater, and I don't know what kind of problem or what kind of day this man was having who was at the counter, but he was at the counter, and there was this teenage girl behind it, and she just had sort of this frightened look on her face, and he was just like letting her have it. He was upset about something, and he wanted her to know about it, and he was just griping at this young woman, and I couldn't figure out really what he was going on about. I couldn't hear it. I tried. I couldn't really hear what was going on, but I could see in her eyes that she was just like, she just was sitting there taking it and wasn't going to do anything. And I'll admit to you, I was really sensitive about this kind of thing at the time, because our daughter, Becca, had just started working in the theater in Owosso. And she would tell me about all these people that would go in, and just these unreasonable people in the Owosso theater. I'm sure it was none of you. I'm sure none of you were in that category, but she would tell me these stories about these just ridiculously demanding people. And that's why I went to the theater in Lansing. But anyway, so finally I get up there to the girl, and I'm like, hey, it's none of my business. Before I did that, though, this guy, he stormed by me with his popcorn. Like he just stormed by me, and I gotta admit, for just a second, it was a split second, but I was going to trip him. Like I was going to stick my foot out. I thought about it, prayed about it. I was pretty sure that isn't what Jesus would do, so I didn't do that. But I get up to the counter and said, hey, it's none of my business, but what in the world was this guy's problem? She said, he was so mad because I put too much popcorn in his bucket, and he didn't think he could carry it out without spilling it. That's what he was all ripped about. Again, I knew right then, like Jesus totally would have tripped him. Like Jesus would have stuck his foot out there and tripped in that pot. He wouldn't have had that problem any longer. Like you got too much popcorn. We can take care of that. But I mean, that's just, it's ridiculous. Throwing a fit because he's got too much popcorn in his bucket to go into a nice air-conditioned theater on a summer day watching this huge movie. I mean, it's just ruining his day. Like I don't know how he was able to make it home. I hope he did, but I don't know. Like we've all been there. Hopefully not to that degree. But we can lose perspective. We can forget how much we have been blessed. And listen, I understand, like this whole year, it's been a lot to deal with. There's been a lot to complain about. There's been a lot to disagree with. Or if I were in charge, I would do it this way. Or why don't they do this? Or I'd have done it this way. And I'm not making light of what anybody's going through. But I think that even now, we need to have a little perspective. And maybe because of this, maybe we'll, as a nation, as a people, maybe we'll have a little better perspective. Maybe we'll be a little more grateful and not get so torqued about the little things that go wrong in our lives. These things that you don't hear it too much anymore, but we used to refer to them as first world problems, right? FWP. And you're talking to somebody and they're going on about how, whatever, some problem they're having. And then we realize, first world problems, like we don't have really problems. You don't hear that much anymore. People don't talk about minimizing things as, well, just first world problems, even though it still is applicable. I did a search a few years ago for a sermon I was working on, hashtag FWP or hashtag first world problems, just to see some of the things that would pull off of mostly social media. And a couple of them I think were kind of telling. One person said, first world problem, it's so frustrating to get home from the grocery store and not be able to fit the food in the refrigerator. Like, it's so annoying that I got so much food, like it won't fit in the refrigerator. Another person, this is one of my favorites, this movie is taking so long to download. It's already been 10 minutes. Like to download an entire high-definition movie, probably 10 gigabyte file onto your phone is taking so long. Like 4 years ago, that would have taken like 4 months to download that thing to the phone, right? Another person says, I am so sick of eating all the restaurants near work. Like that's the hardship of their life. And one of them hit really close to home. One person said, "Ugh, I hate it when my Apple Watch doesn't register the right distance when I run on the beach. It's clearly going to be one of those days, right?" I mean, like, seriously, I love my Apple Watch. Like, it's one of the greatest things ever. It's incredible. It's like we're in the year 2150, like it's Star Trek Spock kind of stuff. But seriously, like, this is how you judge how good your day is going to be. That your expensive Apple Watch is going to shave maybe a tenth of a mile off what you thought that you have run on a beach. Like, seriously. But that's oftentimes the spirit of us in the Western world. Too often it's the attitude of myself, to be quite honest with you. It's an interesting thing that's been pointed out ad nauseum, and we know this, and it's become so cliche, but it's so true that never has there in the history of civilization been a more indulged culture, a more indulged people. And yet I can tell you, having been at different places around the world, that we are among the most discontent, most ungrateful people in the entire history of the world. Well, God reaches a point where he's had enough of the whining, and so here's kind of the crux. We see just how seriously he takes this. In Numbers 14:26, Lord said to Moses and Aaron, the leaders of the people, how long will this wicked community grumble against me? I've heard the complaints of these grumbling Israelites, so tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very thing that I heard you say. You keep complaining about the fact I'm not taking care of you. You keep complaining about how hard your life is. Okay, well, let's make it so. And so he says, in this wilderness, your bodies will fall. Every one of you 20 years or older or more who has been counted in the census and who has complained, who has grumbled against me, you will die in this place. See, a lot of us don't realize why it was that they were wandering around in that desert so long. It's because God was waiting. He was waiting for this generation of complainers to die off so that he could accomplish what he wanted to accomplish in his people. He was just waiting, because he knows, like, it doesn't matter, like, they could get in the promised land and flow with milk and honey and every good thing. It wouldn't matter. There will still be this group of people, these grumblers, this riffraff, who will spread dissension and complaining throughout. So he just says, I'm gonna wait for them to die. That is how seriously God takes this situation. I like a preacher, Erwin Lutzer, explained it this way. He said, complaining may seem innocent enough to us, but God, he takes it personally. He takes it personally. And parents, we know this, right? Like, we understand this. When we hear these complaining, grumbling things from our kids, like we've given them all we can give them. And not that it's about material things, but we've provided for them. And yet, oftentimes, all we hear is complaining, and I don't have this, and I want to better this, and all these things, and how much it is a slam against God. You see, when we complain, it may seem innocent enough to us, but God takes it personally. It's kind of like us saying to God, I don't believe in you, God. I don't trust you. I don't believe that you are who you said you are. I don't believe that you'll do what you said you'll do. And so when we strip down complaining, that's really what it is. It's a refusal to trust God. It's a refusal to trust God. It's a refusal to acknowledge his goodness and his grace in our lives, and the fact that he gives us so many things that we do not deserve, not least of which is eternal life and forgiveness of sins. So he calls us to be worshipers because of his blessings, but whining is the opposite of worship. Complaining is the opposite of praising. Worship is giving glory to God for who he is, for what he does, for the fact that he keeps his promises. But whining ignores all of these things. And ingratitude undermines the provision of God. It disregards, it overlooks his generosity. So Numbers 14:11, man, like, this is our God that said this. How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long? How long will they refuse to believe in me? In spite of all the miraculous signs I performed for them, God says, their lack of gratitude and thanksgiving is a way of treating me with contempt. That's how personally he takes this. Our God who saved the people from slavery, who sent the plagues upon their oppressors so that they would let them go, or the God who promised a new day and a new land. He split the Red Sea. When they were hungry, he provided manna. When they were thirsty, he brought water from a rock. And yet the theme of his people is gongusmos, just constant complaining. The sun's too hot. The journey's too long. The food's too bland. Listen, God has been so good to us. And the reason why this is such a serious sin, in particular for Christians, is because it completely undermines the gospel. Like, it undermines the gospel. And when there are things in our life that we hold so dear, that when they're not there, or when they are threatened to be taken away, that we would complain and get fearful, and it kind of overshadows the presence of the gospel of first importance in our life, that is a serious problem. And we're to be the light that shines the good news of the gospel, that here's a God who loves us so much that he sent his only son, that he actually entered human history through the person of his son. And yet we complain and we whine, and we get so confused with what is really important, what is truly important, what is of first importance, and what are lesser things. So Paul says in Philippians, do everything without grumbling and complaining, so that you can shine like stars in the universe. You ever known a really negative, caustic attitude, or a grumbler or complainer who shines like stars in the universe? See, it's like we're on a dimmer switch. Every time we're like that, we're just like on a dimmer switch, and how God wants to shine the light of Christ radiantly through our lives. It just gets kind of turned down to where sometimes people can hardly see it. And so when God provides for us so generously and so sacrificially, and yet we start off every day complaining about a job we don't like, or the kids who aren't ready on time, or about the new wrinkles we see when we look in the mirror, about the teacher or the coach who doesn't get it, or about the in-laws who stayed longer than they should, or we start every day complaining, it's the picture I get in my mind is of God holding back the walls of water of the Red Sea so that his people can stroll across And they get halfway across. They're on their way to freedom. And they look down and they just start complaining because they've got mud between their toes. Like that's kind of the picture, that's the image I get. That we've been saved. We've been saved. We've been given grace. We've been given forgiveness through Jesus Christ. We were slaves to sin, but God rescued us. He delivered us. He saved us. He made himself nothing so that we might be able to have eternal life. And so I think in light of God's goodness, in light of God's grace, it is so appropriate for us to say, not once, maybe every day, God, forgive me. Forgive me. Forgive me for the days where I've not been grateful. So this week, my friends, regardless, for example, of who wins the election, as we approach Thanksgiving Day and as we head into Christmas season, like that needs to be a prayer that's on our lips to help us keep perspective in life. God, forgive me for the days when I've not been grateful. And maybe like me, you've never really thought much about the fact that complaining and whining and that negative spirit is something that really does need to be repented of. But it is a sin. It's a sin that is so offensive to God. He takes it so personally because he is our Father. Listen, he is our Father who has given literally everything he had for us. So maybe a challenge as we think about this prayer, God, forgive me for the days I've not been grateful. Maybe a challenge for us from now until maybe Thanksgiving is to I don't know whether it's you write it on a piece of paper, or maybe you have a journal or your phone or whatever it is where you put things, where you write things, where you keep things, just to decide that maybe every day, maybe it's the night before you go to bed, maybe it's when you get up first thing in the morning, that you're going to write down. You're going to write down just 2 or 3 things that you are grateful for. And you're going to remember those things. And so as time goes by the time we get to Thanksgiving, you've got like a whole list of things that you're grateful for. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that might be going wrong in your life. There's a lot of stuff that is a problem. But look at all these things that God has done for you, allowed you to have, given you, whatever it might be. And we can remember how God blesses us in 100,000 ways that we never ever know. So I think if we do that, like what I think, because of seeing how personally God takes this issue of ingratitude, I think what it will do is invite, if we are grateful, it will invite God's blessing into our lives in some really, really unique ways when we're intentional to notice. And then maybe we'll have the habit of, instead of complaining about everything that's wrong or what we don't have, we'll have the habit of every day saying, God, thank you. Thank you for what you've given to me. Thank you for what you've done for me, God. And forgive me, God, for the days when I have not been grateful.